Why do so many people chase money but still feel empty?
This is the $1 million question. We get patterned when we're young to believe that incremental money equals incremental happiness. That's like an equation that we start building in our minds because it's true when we're young. Early on, money directly buys happiness. Anyone that tells you money can't buy happiness is lying to you. Fundamentally, in the early years of your life, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Money buys happiness. It reduces fundamental burdens and stresses. You can take care of the people around you. You can start to afford basic pleasures like vacations, all of those kind of things. But you start to create this pattern in your mind in those early years that incremental bit of money equals an incremental amount of happiness. And after you reach a certain point, that equation no longer holds true. And so as a patterned individual, you continue to chase it thinking that it will, when in fact, above that certain level, it no longer does. So you keep chasing it in the same way you did in those early years, thinking that it's going to lead to that happiness when it doesn't.
So where is that point of diminishing returns?
It depends on who you ask. The science on this has been disputed in various forms over the years. The earliest study on this was Daniel Kahneman's famous, I think it was in the 1970s, they did this study that basically said $70,000 was the level above which you were no longer getting incremental happiness. And there's a few issues with all of these studies. I would say the number one is that you're applying an average across all of society. So you're saying like, well, it's $70,000 on average is the level. If you live in Los Angeles and West Hollywood, where we are right now, or in New York City or in London, any major city, it is going to be way, way higher than whatever it's going to be in Omaha, Nebraska, or a rural place in the middle of the country. That's just the reality. Cost of living is very different. So it's sort of like, I think it was Nassim Taleb that once said, you should never cross a river if it's 4 feet deep on average. It's like a bad idea, right? Because at some points it's going to be 20 feet deep and you're going to drown. It's the same thing with this science. And so the point is there is a level, and what that level is differs based on where you live. I would say that the most recent data around this is like $200,000 on average, but it's probably 400 or 500 in a lot of major cities, and it's probably a bit lower than that if you're in a more rural area.
What is the best use of money then to procure? I mean, so assuming you've got the base level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs met, food, shelter, security, safety, water, food. I mentioned food already. Yeah. How do you then, what is the best use of money so as to use it productively for eudaimonia, for flourishing?
I love the phrase eudaimonia, by the way. I'm glad that you went there with it. I think that it depends on the individual, but the fundamental common thread is that it is going to be found in experiences. And when I say experiences, those experiences could be derived through people, through physical pursuits, through health, through running a marathon, through investing in your health in different ways. It could be through searching for purpose and going off and building something big, or it could be just through pure freedom, the ability to go and engage in new experiences, things that you haven't been able to do before. But the ability to use money as a tool rather than as the goal is the real key difference once you get above that level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's sort of like in the early years, money is the goal because money very directly does buy happiness. After those early years, money becomes the tool, but not the goal.
Like if when money is scarce, basically. In the early years, money is certainly scarce. I mean, I remember being a broke college student and pinching pennies, and especially when I had to work for that money, it wasn't necessarily being given to me by my parents. Every, additional incremental increase in money that I had was directly, I would say, in that college, in the context of college, related to my happiness. But yeah, at a certain point, once you're able to buy the things that you value, at that age, it ceases to. There is no incremental boost in happiness.
Yeah, it starts becoming more about what the money enables in other areas. And so the way that I articulate it is money isn't nothing. It simply can't be the only thing. Your wealthy life may be enabled by money, but it will be defined by all of these other things: time, people, purpose, health, these other areas of our life that we're going to use money to hopefully build as we continue to scale up those ranks.
So are those the other forms of wealth that you talk about in your new book?
Exactly. So the 5 types of wealth that I cover in the book are time wealth, which is all about freedom, the ability to choose; social wealth, which is about your relationships; mental wealth, it's about purpose, growth, the ability to create space in your life; physical wealth, which you obviously know all about, and then financial wealth, the one that most people know, money.
What is like the origin story of the ideas laid out in your book? Like, how did you arrive at these concepts?
I spent the better part of the first 30 years of my life as a pretty deeply insecure person and chasing all of the definitions of success that I believe you're handed by the world. The origin of my insecurity is sort of interesting to even just contemplate for myself because I basically grew up in a household where academic success was the measure. That was what, I have a Harvard professor father, Indian mother, Indian culture, very academically oriented. I had an older sister who was extremely high achieving academically. And I, from a young age, decided for whatever reason that I wasn't very smart and that my sister was the smart one and that I wasn't as smart. And those stories you tell yourself are so powerful because humans are very good at finding evidence that confirms the story that you already believe. You know this from science, right? Like whatever you already believe about the world, I guarantee you will go out and find evidence that confirms that belief.
Confirmation bias.
Exactly. And when you tell yourself a story early in your life, it is particularly damning because over the course of a long period of time, you just continue to find evidence that confirms it, and you've ignored every single piece of evidence that would refute it. And what happens when you have a story like that, which I'm willing to bet a lot of people out there have some version of that, is you start chasing other things that will get you the kind of external affirmations or pats on the back. And in society, those things are like external metrics of success: money, status, fame, things like that. And so when I took my first job, the entire thought process that I had around it was, what is going to get me the most pats on the back? Well, it's taking the high status sounding job. One of the best pieces of advice now that I hear when it comes to career is like, do you want this job or do you want other people to see you having this job? And there's a big difference between the two. Like a lot of people will take a job because they want the LinkedIn post. That was very much what I did. You take the job where you're going to say, oh, I'm humbled and honored to announce that I'm doing this, right? And I chased that path almost off a cliff. I was getting promoted. I was doing the things in the early years that were getting me that incremental happiness. I got to that point of diminishing returns and I continued chasing it exactly as I have advised not to. And unfortunately on that path, everything else started to show cracks. In particular, my relationships. I was living 3,000 miles away from my parents, not seeing them at all. My relationship with my sister had ground to a halt. My wife and I were unfortunately struggling to conceive at the time. That was creating a bunch of strain on our relationship. I was drinking 6-7 nights a week. My mental health was all over the map. I was overweight. I mean, there was all these things suffering, while on the outside looking in, it was like I was winning the game, right? I was doing the things that you're supposed to want to do. I was achieving the markers of success. And in 2020, 2021, I started to have this sensation that if that was what winning felt like, I had to be playing the wrong game. And it took a conversation with an old friend where he pointed out the very striking math of the amount of time that I actually had left with these people that I cared about in my life, that I was only going to see my parents a few more times if I continued living the way I was living so far away, not prioritizing these relationships. And that was really the turning point. It was this realization that I was building my entire life around this one thing at the expense of everything else.
Wow. And what had your job path been like up until the point at which you switched to becoming an entrepreneur?
I had been working at a private equity fund. So for those who don't understand that space, it's in the investment world. So you're buying and selling companies. I basically started as an analyst and rose through the ranks. The long hours, the long weeks, learning a ton, incredible learning experience, a whole lot of good things that I would say about it. What happened, frankly, was less about the industry and much more about my own narrow prioritization of this one thing that I got so honed in on as being the thing that was going to make me one day have that feeling of arrival, right? We're all searching for that feeling that we're going to wake up one day and say, I've arrived, right? Like, this is it. I'm happy. I'm content. I'm fulfilled. And we build those things up as being about reaching whatever summit we've propped up as the destination. It's like the bonus, the promotion, the title, whatever the thing is. And we know this. It's called the arrival fallacy. You build this thing up, you get there, and then inevitably you feel that momentary blip of kind of dopamine induced euphoria. And then you reset and you say, like, is this it? Is that all there was? And you reset to whatever the next thing is on the horizon.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, like, it's, I forget who said it, but I heard once, I think like Chris Williamson, he might have mentioned this on his podcast, that there are things that you currently have that you once pined for. And yet, you know, I feel like so many of us are stuck on this hedonic treadmill, you know, this hamster wheel of just chasing material success.
Yeah. I had this experience recently. I haven't talked about this before, that a few weeks ago, I was in my office and I was working on something related to the book launch, and I was really focused, and my son, I have a 2.5-year-old son, bursts into my office, starts just like toddler stuff, tearing everything down, jumping on the couch, throwing things on the ground, yelling. And I started having this like super negative train of thought, just like, why is he doing this? Doesn't he know I'm trying to focus? This is so annoying, all of these thoughts. And in that moment, I had this like flashback where I caught myself to 5 years ago when my wife and I were in the middle of this 2-year fertility journey, struggling to conceive. And I had prayed every single night that one day we would have a healthy child. And then there I was in that moment complaining about the exact thing that I had prayed for. And it was a reminder to me of exactly that fact, that sometimes the things you pray for become the things that you complain about in life. Like the house that you prayed for becomes the house that you complain is too small. The car that you always dreamed of becomes the car that you want to trade in. The jewelry that you wanted becomes the jewelry that you're annoyed about. All of those things, if you allow them to be that way, if you don't have the awareness to pull yourself into the present and recognize that sometimes you are literally living out your younger self prayers.
Well, why do you think it's so seductive then to be distracted by the shiny new thing?
I think there are two things. One is it's biology and it's natural. Right? The hedonic adaptation is an evolutionary survival feature. The whole idea of resetting to a baseline is really good for your survival, because if you ate a steak in the wild, or you caught a lion and you were excited and you ate it, and all of a sudden you were just on this high and like floating around and everything was great and you were happy, you were more likely to get eaten by the lion right away because you were letting your guard down. And so the adaptation of like, I do this thing, it feels really good, and then I come back to the baseline and I'm no longer that happy, I'm alert again, was actually a good survival feature. But in a world where we don't really have to worry about getting eaten by the lion at all times, hopefully, whatever the metaphorical lion is in your life, it actually serves more good than bad in a lot of people's lives. The second piece is it's a comparison problem. We have more exposure to other people's lives from all around the world than ever before because of the things sitting in our pockets. Right? Like if you go back 20 or 30 years, the exposure that you had to other people's lives was maybe through the newspaper, maybe through some television, maybe the people that lived on your block. So there was the keeping up with the Joneses that happened to be like your neighbors in your immediate community. But in your immediate community, you're probably living, generally speaking, within the kind of same ballpark socioeconomically as everybody else. On your phone, that is not the case, right? You are, and they barrage you. Like on Instagram, you open Instagram, you're hit with a flood of like yachts, private jets. Why aren't you living this way? Why aren't you traveling? Why aren't you staying in 5-star resorts? Why don't you have $1 million a year job? All of these things, right? It's hitting you in the face. And when that happens, what do humans do? We compare ourselves. Why is my position not what this other person's is? What are they doing that I'm not doing? And so as a result, you start having this negative experience about where you currently are relative to all of these other people in the world. The single best way to destroy something good in your life is to compare it to something else.
So true. Comparison is the thief of joy. It's absolutely, yeah, it's definitely a thing today that you are now, whether you like it or not, I mean, you're privy to a global marketplace. If it were a marketplace limited to ideas, I think that would be one thing. But today, everybody in a way has become themselves like productized.
Yeah.
You know, we're like comparing ourselves to this like highlight reel of somebody else who could be, you know, not just in like the next town, but like on the other continent and whatever. And it's without context. And, you know, our social media profiles are just highlight reels. They're completely doctored. So
yeah, half the time it's made up, right? I mean, like I saw a really funny, it was sort of a meme, but it was like, satirical, but also kind of dystopian the other day. That was someone saying that a like pretty girl born on a farm in Kansas now like can create an Instagram profile, post photos and videos of herself, and get flown to the Cayman Islands by some like billionaire, go marry that billionaire, and goes off and lives her life. That girl used to marry the young guy from the farm down the road in Kansas. And so the post was like, the guy on the farm in Kansas is totally cooked. Like, how is he going to compete in a global market in the same way that he was able to before? And it was obviously like partially tongue in cheek, but there's some reality to that in what you're saying, which is like the global market that we now exist in, it's comparison based, and it's reality that like you have now this world where you are competing in some way, shape, or form in the dating market, in the job market, in the world. I mean, in all of these things against the entire world rather than your small local community.
How is it affecting men and women differently? I mean, you've alluded to kind of how it's affecting a certain subset of, I guess, females, but yeah, I mean, it's got to be different the way, either gender kind of perceive the sort of global marketplace now?
It's a good question. Let's think about it. So men, I think the most damning thing that men face today is this feeling of being lost in your 20s and who is grabbing your attention with the solution to that feeling of lostness. There are a lot of men that feel lost. When you're in your 20s, you probably will feel lost at some point, right? Like I think all of us at some point in our 20s feel lost in some way. It's very rare that there's like the perfect path that you end up finding and it just clicks. And when you're lost, you search for the thing that you can grab hold of, like your anchor point that you can grab onto. And I would argue that right now, the narrative of make tons of money and that will solve that feeling is the clearest and most shareable and viral narrative that exists. So like the people that are posting the private jet or the yacht and saying with the girls and saying like, well, I'm 22 and I did this in the last 6 months. You're an idiot for not doing this. Join my Discord group and you can learn how. And not telling you the fact that like they made that money by selling you a Discord course, not by doing the thing that they're going to teach you how to do, trading options or whatever it's going to be.
Like a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? Like that time and time again, right? Like there's nothing new under the sun at some point. But that narrative really works, right? Like that gets clicks, it gets shared, it gets the anger, rage bait comments. Like it really, really works on social media. And so they are winning the war for attention of this sort of like lost 20, 30-year-old male. And that's a real struggle, I think, for a lot of men, is to say like, what are the other paths that exist that I would argue will lead to a more long-term freedom and a life that you actually want, a life that's filled with rich relationships and the depth of love that I think you can experience. That is a real struggle for men. I think for women, it's a entirely different struggle, which is really around, in my opinion, this sort of fake set of ideals and body image and what good looks like that social media has created. And I think that hasn't really changed in the last 10 years. The Instagram age of the like perfect filtered, edited AI is making it much worse. I mean, I've seen like, there are people that I know what you look like, and then I know what you look like on Instagram. It's very, very different, right? Like we can create a very idealized version of what we look like. But when you are a young girl or young woman sitting at home and you see that, and that is what you think good looks like and what you aspire to be, but you look at yourself in the mirror and you can't imagine that, it creates a lot of unhappiness. And you can control it to some extent. I mean, my wife has like really hyper curated her Instagram feed so that it's basically now only like architecture and food things. But it's hard to do. It actually takes deliberate effort to avoid those things that are sparking the negativity in you. I think the starting point, by the way, on all of that is map for a week. When you open Instagram, just take Instagram, it could be TikTok, whatever it is. Every single thing that sparks like a slightly negative emotion in you or a negative energy, do the thing where it says like not interested in this for a week. I guarantee your feed and your algorithm will be entirely different after a week. But you have to be willing to say not interested in this to any of the things that actually make you feel that negativity. Because that's where you start to like actually get rid of the things from your life that are leading to that negative thought pattern, making you feel like you're not enough, making you feel that like comparison or envy or jealousy, that is not really productive for what you're trying to build in your life.
Yeah, 100%. Have you heard that Instagram now has a feature where you can reset your algorithm? Somebody's told me that that's now a thing on Instagram. I haven't seen it myself, but
no, I haven't heard that, although it would be really great. There's a close friend of mine named Scott Belsky. He's the founder of this business called Behance, which he sold to Adobe, worked at Adobe for a long time. He's an incredible product creator in the technology space. Recently wrote a piece in his blog, which is called Implications, where he talked about the idea for the future of like customizable algorithms, and how he thinks that like the ability to customize your experience in your algorithm will become more and more of a thing as the future gets created, which I completely agree with when I think about it.
Yeah, totally. So why do so many people so readily lose sight of the other 4 types of wealth? I mean, I feel like financial wealth can be quite conspicuous, when we're talking about like the fancy houses, the trips, the nice cars, maybe more so than the other 4 types of wealth. But nonetheless, I mean, like everybody loves feeling good in their bodies, feeling creatively expressed. Nonetheless, these other 4 types seem so frequently relegated today.
Peter Drucker is this famous management theorist. He said, what gets measured gets managed. It's like the idea that the thing that you can measure ends up being the thing that you focus on. It's the thing that you narrowly hone in on and optimize around. Money has always been the most measurable form of wealth. It is the most measurable. It's been a feature of money for a long time. It's what's allowed it to create this thriving capitalist economy that we have. It's so measurable. Unfortunately, because it is so measurable, it becomes the thing that everyone narrowly hones in on and focuses around. Because the other areas of wealth have not been as measurable, we haven't done that same thing. We haven't focused on them in the same way. The reason I know this is true is because you've now seen with physical wealth becoming more measurable with all of these trackers and things that we wear over recent years, people have started to pay more attention to that. People flex on like their sleep scores on social media. They talk about, their physical metrics, their runs, they post their Stravas, they do those things because it's become measurable in a way that it wasn't 5, 10, 15 years ago. These other areas of wealth, how do you measure them in the same way? That has always historically been a problem. Once you start measuring them, you can start making the right decisions to build them, focusing around them, and actually growing them in the same way as you would your financial wealth.
Wow. So the gamification aspect of health, at least, has led to a more sort of conspicuous engagement around it, and therefore broader, I guess, appreciation.
I think enormously so. I mean, you were probably very well equipped to answer that. I would argue that having a 6-pack is now more of a flex than wearing a Rolex. And I really mean that. Like, I really do think that there is something to be said for a 6-pack being more of a flex about the type of person that you are. It means you are disciplined. It means you've shown up. It means you've done hundreds of hard workouts, eaten bland meals. Like, you've done a whole lot of work to earn that thing. Versus the Rolex, which you could just have rich parents that bought you a Rolex. It doesn't quite say as much. And I think that has changed. That's a vibe shift of the last few years, in part due to the fact that the health movement, which you've been a big part of, which I'm very grateful for, by the way, to people like you, has made it measurable and cool to actually track and progress against these things.
Yeah, it's amazing. It truly is amazing, this broader adoption of dietary and lifestyle principles for better health. I mean, now we're seeing it at the upper echelon of, the national conversation around government and policy. I never would have anticipated that, a health author, nutrition author such as myself would be getting primetime airtime on, the most watched news network in the United States right now. It's like, it's truly a gift.
But you've talked about it in a really unique way. I saw a clip of you talking about it that, if you have a sick fish in a dirty fish bowl, you can either medicate the fish or you can clean the fish bowl and then figure out the rest after that. And it's a really interesting articulation of this exact thing. Like, we have had this dirty fish bowl of all these things in our health ecosystem. And now there are people talking about the fact that that fish bowl is dirty. We should probably address that before we think about medicating the fish in all of these different ways. The unfortunate thing with health that I think has happened, and it happens in all of these areas, is whenever attention flows into a given area, a lot of opportunists try to go find a way to profit off of that, right? We still live in a capitalist economy. And so that's what happens. Attention goes to an area and then a bunch of people flood in to try to profit from that attention. We've obviously seen that in a variety of different ways in the health space. In the money space, it's all over the place, right? Every single person is ready to sell you some complicated, fancy, crazy financial scheme, right? That's going to make you millions. Don't worry, no risk. It's fine. The same thing now happens in health, right? Like you go on the internet, there's a million people trying to sell you the perfect diet. All you have to pay is 7 easy payments of $19.99 and you can have the perfect body, the ab zapper belt, whatever the thing is, there's always some fancy instrument. And one of the things that I am very grateful for with your content, with some of the other folks that are out there, is you ground yourself in these core pillars, these basics that, like, fundamentally, as I write about it in the book and as I think you would agree with, it's like a video game. You start on level 1. You don't need to worry about what Brian Johnson's doing at level 100. Just like start on the basics. Move your body a little bit. Eat whole unprocessed foods. Sleep 7-8 hours a night. You're probably getting 80-90% of the benefit right there. Don't worry about the like red light therapy and cold plunges and saunas until you cover those boring basics that are at level 1. Then you can think about level 2, level 3, and start working your way up. But that doesn't sell in the same way that the sexy, complicated things do. And that's a struggle, right? Like we have, I call it the complexity trap, that like smart, intelligent people are so prone to chasing the complex, sexy solution because it makes you sound cooler when that's what you do. Like if I go to a cocktail party in LA and I'm out and people are like, hey, what are you doing for your health right now? And I say, well, I'm like moving for 30 minutes a day and I eat, mostly whole unprocessed foods and I sleep 7 hours a night. Everyone's going to move on to the guy that's like, oh, I'm injecting red light, whatever, into my balls, right? Like that's going to sell a lot more. You're going to be much more interesting to all the people there. So you chase that complex, sexy solution. And that creates problems for a lot of people. It's because like as a newbie, if you're just starting out, you think, oh, that's what healthy looks like, is I have to do this crazy stuff. I have to spend all this money. And that's just not true. And so I think we need to fight back against that a lot too in the current zeitgeist.
Isn't there a concept borrowed maybe from business, like the Pareto principle? Isn't that kind of what that is?
Yeah, 100%. It's, Pareto principle is Wilfredo Pareto was this Italian guy who discovered that, I think what he originally discovered was that 80% of land in Italy was owned by 20% of people. And then he started seeing that proportion everywhere. He was like, 80% of the peas came from 20% of the pea pods, like all of these things in his garden. It became this like magic principle to him. And it's that idea that you get 80% of the benefit from 20% of the inputs. And I think that applies to health for sure. It definitely applies to other areas of life. I mean, 80% of the good things that happen in your financial life are going to come from 20% of the inputs, the boring basics that you can do on a daily basis.
Wow, I'm very impressed that you knew his full name.
And
backstory.
Yeah. That's one of my favorites. I think the first time I read about that was like in I think Tim Ferriss wrote about it in 4 Hour Workweek, maybe, because he was talking about it in the context that a little bit of your work is actually what's driving the vast majority of your outcomes in your life. And I think it's a good question to ask yourself, actually, as it relates to your work. Tim, I think, talks about it as if you could only work for 1 hour a day, what would you do? Like if you could only work for an hour a day, really force a constraint on it, what would you do? And how would you continue to make the same amount of money doing that? And what those kind of questions do is they force you to think about, what are the things that are actually moving the needle in my life? Like if I could only do health stuff for 30 minutes a day, what would I do for that 30 minutes? That would continue to help me feel in shape and feel good. You trim away a whole bunch of the noise in your life by asking yourself those things.
Yeah, it's a forcing function.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant advice. Yeah. I mean, you got to focus on the big rocks. You got to major in the majors, not the minors. Because, again, 80% of the gains that you're going to see, certainly in health, but probably also apply to your financial wealth, your social life, your romantic life even, possibly. I'm less of an expert on that.
I don't think anyone's a real expert on romantic life, by the way. This is one of those funny things to me. Love life, friends, like all of these things, right? It's so individual. Like I can't tell you the perfect relationship when I've been married 8 years, right? Like maybe you could go to someone that's been married for 70 years and ask them. I actually did that in the book. I went to a bunch of people that have been married for 50 plus years and asked them for their advice that they would give to their like newly married self. I think it's very interesting to do things like that. But the reality with any advice is that you're taking someone else's map and trying to apply it to your terrain. And that's not always a great approach because their map of reality is going to be very different than whatever you're facing. I actually sometimes think it's more interesting to invert the problem and to say, like, what would make a miserable marriage? What would lead to divorce? What would certainly lead to divorce? Like, okay, well, having a lot of contempt for my partner, probably like complaining about them, not vocalizing appreciation daily. Those kind of things will inevitably lead to divorce. I can almost guarantee it. So I should probably do the exact opposite of those things if I want to build a healthy marriage. Sometimes inversion is actually the best approach for figuring out actually the right path.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. Is there a sign, like a primary sign that somebody's rich but not necessarily wealthy?
A primary sign, that's interesting. I think there are a lot of people that we read stories about, we read books about, that I would never want to trade lives with. I always think that the way that we should think about the world is like, would I actually want to trade lives with that person? We celebrate and admire the person who went and made hundreds of millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and ignore the fact that they have 4 ex-wives and 5 children that don't talk to them. We pat that person on the back. We write books about that person. We tell them that they won the game. But you have to ask yourself, is that actually a game that I care to win? If that's what winning looks like, do I actually want to win? Is that a mountain that I actually care to climb? And if not, let me pivot and walk down a different path. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with wanting to build your life around the one thing. We actually need people in the world that want to be like the crazy ones, if you will, that want to go after and chase the one thing and create these world-changing companies at the expense of a lot of other things. We need people like that. I just don't think that everyone should feel the pressure to be one. I think that you should get to decide what you actually want, right? The Latin phrase sapere aude means dare to know. It's the idea of like independent thinking, that you should actually be able to reject whatever assumptions that you've been told about the world and think for yourself. That applies to what I'm talking about here. It is just to say that you get to identify what you truly care about. You don't have to accept what the world has told you to care about, what your family has said, what your friends have said, and definitely not what social media has said. You get to decide. And then you can take actions to build your life around those things.
Well, it's certainly true that that financial success, monetary wealth, brings with it, a certain level of freedom, but it also creates a whole new set of problems that you never could have anticipated in the absence of that type of wealth.
Yeah, money solves money problems, but not much else.
Yeah.
And as you said, it creates its own set of problems. I mean, one of the biggest struggles that every single financially wealthy person I know faces is how to raise well-adjusted children in a world where their kids can basically afford absolutely anything and where it's very tempting to prevent them from failing at anything. We know this. I mean, you know this from your own childhood. I certainly know it from mine. Failures were the single best thing that happened to you in hindsight. Whatever your falls were, whatever your stumbles were, whatever those struggles were, those were the best things that happened to you. It's very easy to avoid those pains for your kid if you have a ton of money. You can insulate them from all of those falls, all of those things. And that's really hard then to raise a well-adjusted child. It's why it's so impressive when you see a kid who did grow up with tons and tons of money or tons and tons of means and is really well-adjusted and has managed to carve their own path and create their own thing because it's so difficult. But I do think that fundamentally what this comes down to is the idea that if you are going to achieve 0.0001% outcomes in a single area, financial success or business success, there is a cost, a real cost in other areas of life to doing that. And being eyes wide open about that cost is important as you go in. Because what you don't want to happen is you don't want to get to the top of that mountain and think that you won and realize that all of these other things have been sacrificed and you never thought about it. You weren't willing to make those trade-offs. There's that movie, Nicolas Cage, I think it's called Family Man, where he has lived this very rich life. He's got the fancy Ferrari, he's lived this whole life, but he's completely alone and miserable. And he has this like Christmas experience where he gets like this flash into this alternate path that he could have been down if he had gone with the girl that he was in love with when he was younger. And he has a family. He's not rich. Doesn't have all of the fancy things, but he has this loving family. And it's like this juxtaposition of these two lives that gets created, of the two paths that he could have walked down in his world. And it's such an interesting articulation of that exact idea, that there's sort of like the list price of success, which is the hard work and the hours you have to put in. And then there's the real price of that success, which is also the sacrifices that had to be made in other areas. And some things look like a good deal based on the list price, but they're a ripoff when you think about the real price of that.
Yeah, it's actually very liberating. The older I get and the more I am able to rub shoulders with people who have achieved a certain level of financial success, it's incredibly liberating having the sense that you wouldn't necessarily, even though they have like, some of these people that I'm thinking of have vastly greater financial wealth than I have, but I wouldn't trade places with them in a minute. It
is liberating, right?
It's freeing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you recognize that the things that you want are yours, and no one can take those from you. Like I think about this all the time, that the wealthiest I ever feel is when I can take my son in the pool at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. Because that means way more to me than anything else. You could pay me $100 million a year. I wouldn't give up that, because the money wouldn't allow me to do that anymore. And frankly, it would mean that I probably had to be away and traveling all the time and doing tons of other things and like working 90-hour weeks and all these other things that wouldn't actually lead to the end that I really want, which is the freedom to take my son in the pool at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday, to be healthy enough to do that, to have a loving relationship with him where he wants me to do that, to, be able to create that life. I actually don't need a whole bunch more financial wealth to be able to do that. I need to build a life that allows me to do that.
It's true. I was born and raised in New York City, and my parents were, there was a window during my upbringing where my parents were actually very successful, but regardless of how successful they were, sushi was always too expensive for my parents. Like they were very resistant to we would never go out to Japanese restaurants, and ordering sushi was like a once every other month kind of luxury for whatever reason. Like my parents just always thought, like, they raised me to believe it was like a ripoff. And despite that, sushi was like my favorite food, like growing up.
Probably because of that.
Yeah.
Sushi was your favorite food.
But I love it. And it's this kind of really funny thing where, like, now in my, adult life, like, I can afford to eat sushi whenever I want. And whenever I'm eating sushi, I feel wealthy. Like, I feel so wealthy whenever I'm like able to order sugarfish up to my house and just like eat an all you can eat. Like I sprawl it out in front of me. I put on some like nice music. It's like me time, And it's like one of the times where I really feel like presently, like, just super mindful of like how successful I am because I'm eating sushi.
My version of that is the mini bar in hotels. Like, I was convinced from a young age that if I touched the mini bar in a hotel room, my family was going bankrupt.
Yes.
Like, we were never going to recover financially from this misstep that I just went through.
Still feel that
and
way.
So now, like, I'm staying in a hotel near here, and I got to the hotel and I was really thirsty, and I just like opened the mini bar, and there was a sparkling water, and I was just like, yep, I'm taking that sparkling water. And it's funny, like, those things from childhood, they last your entire life. You never really reset.
Oh, it's amazing. I love ordering. It's like my favorite food. And I just feel like such a sense of gratitude and pride that I'm able to afford to feed myself sushi whenever I want. It's incredible. Also, when buying like certain objects, like they say that money can't, that objects, like material products, goods, don't necessarily bring happiness. But I'd be curious your thoughts on that, because there are certain things that I own that when I remember that I own them, do bring me at the very least like a dopamine spike that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, I think that the clear articulation there is, I call it the bot status test. I actually have it in the book. It's this idea of asking yourself before you buy something, would I buy this thing if I couldn't tell anyone that I had it? If I couldn't take a picture of it, if I couldn't show it to anyone, if I couldn't tell anyone about it, would I still buy it? So the watch you're about to buy, would I buy this if it was just for my own pleasure? That I love watch engineering. I love seeing it. It makes me feel proud that I was able to afford this thing, but I can't show it to anyone else. Same thing with the car. Whatever the thing is, would you still get it? It sounds like for these purchases that you're talking about, they bring you a sense of pride to know that you have these things and that you're able to do it. And so that's real. That's real utility that you get out of it in the form of that pleasure and happiness. I actually feel that way when it comes to the whole debate on whether you should buy or rent a house. This is like my weirdest hot take. There's all of this discussion online of whether it ever makes sense to buy a house. There's people on one side that say, like, on paper, the math, it never works out. You should just rent. And then there's people that are like, buying a home is the only way that you're ever going to make any sort of net worth and money and financial future. I purely like owning a house for one reason, which makes no sense, which is I feel an enormous amount of pride being able to host my family in a house that I own. I don't know why. It means not like me renting the house versus owning the house shouldn't actually mean anything. It's still a house that I have that people can come to. But there's something about it when, like, on a Saturday morning when my parents have stayed overnight, and we wake up and they're playing with my son, and I'm sitting there and I'm making everyone breakfast, and I can see them and people are laughing and playing. That's some of the happiest I'll ever be in my whole life, is that feeling. And it's because I feel this sense of pride that, like, I created this, that I feel like I own this, like I built this thing, this house full of love, if you will. And that is worth an enormous amount to me. Like, that makes me feel a certain way. It's the same, it's the dopamine hit, the same way that you're articulating it. And so there are certain things where you just need to ask yourself that question. Like, is it really creating utility, me having this thing? Or is it that I want other people to see me having it? That's what I'm chasing.
Well, it sounds like the mediator here is like whether or not the thing has sentimental value, like real emotional weight for you.
Yeah, or whether you just enjoy it. I mean, I have friends who are just obsessed with cars. They just think cars are the engineering, the engines, all of the history around them. Watches, the same thing. I have friends who just really genuinely enjoy watches and watch engineering and learning all about it. They nerd out on it. And so I would never tell someone like that, oh, that's silly, it's a status purchase, right? Because it brings them actual joy to learn about the thing, to research it, to go into it. Same way I feel about people who are really into travel points. I have friends who spend ungodly amounts of time thinking about travel hacks and credit card points and using it all for travel. I would rather staple gun my stomach than spend time on those things. That's just me. But if you love that, they really nerd out on it. They enjoy it. It brings them actual joy and utility. So do you, right? Do the things that actually are bringing you that joy. Get rid of the things that aren't, that you feel like you're supposed to be doing. And for me, I felt like I was supposed to be doing all that travel credit card hacking stuff. But I realized no, I could just spend that same amount of time on something else. It's not actually going to change my financial situation.
Yeah, I've never really agreed with the whole minimalist philosophy of life. One of the objects that I own that brings me immense joy to know that I own it. It's a guitar that I bought when it's out of production, but it's a guitar that's played primarily by one of my favorite musical artists. And when I can afford it, I found it on eBay. I think it was $1,500 or maybe around $1,200, something like that. But I mean, these days I barely even have the time to play it, but I see it hanging in my living room. And every time I look at it and I know that I own that guitar and that I paid for it outright with my own money, it's something that just it brightens my day, you know?
My sauna was like that.
Your sauna?
I don't know why. For whatever reason, I got my first sauna and I sat in it the first night that I had it. And I was just man, I made it. For some reason, having a sauna at my house was the moment where I was this is it. I don't need anything else. I have a home sauna. It's not even a fancy, it's not I built a room sauna or anything. It's just a barrel sauna. It's great. But for whatever reason, that, and obviously it has a whole bunch of health benefits, but that has brought me so much pride and joy to just feel I got this thing. I have this thing.
Pretty dope to have a sauna.
Yeah.
I don't currently own a sauna, but I did a couple of years ago, and it was one of the coolest. I mean, it was both cool to own, and I also enjoyed sharing photos of it on social media, but just the fact that I owned it was in my head, it was a pretty
I think it's probably the single highest ROI purchase that I've made.
Interesting.
In terms of both health but also my mental health. I sit in it every single night when I'm home for 20 minutes and I read. Like, it's the only time when I can't have stimulus. So there's no phone. You can't bring a phone in there. You can't do anything else. And it is like the best wind down ritual in the evenings for me. It brings me so much peace of mind. I mean, like, the amount of utility that I've gotten out of that for what I spent on it, it's extraordinary.
Well, it's like the best cardiovascular workout you could get while sitting absolutely still.
Yeah, it's true. It's a good hack.
Yeah, it's amazing. What about wealth traps? What are the biggest wealth traps that people fall into without realizing?
I think that the pursuit of status through acquired means is probably the single biggest wealth trap that people face. And they face it at every single level. What I mean by that is status is actually a pretty useful social mechanism. It's how humans have always organized within hierarchies. It makes sense. You're trying to seek out the respect and admiration of your peers, of people that you actually care about. And historically, if you look at human society or even animal societies, that was generally through physical shows of prowess, right? Like the chest banging of our gorilla ancestors.
Peacocking.
You can't really do that anymore. Maybe certain gyms you can go do that, or like maybe if you go out to a club, guys are like trying to do that. But in general, it's frowned upon in modern society. And so the way that people try to signal status is through acquired means. It's the fastest way that you can do it is you buy the Rolex, or you buy the fancy car, or you buy the house, or you get the country club membership, whatever those things are. And unfortunately, bought status is fleeting and very fickle. Meaning it does not actually confer upon you the lasting respect and admiration that you think. What happens is you get that momentary hit, and then immediately you get this sort of inner ring syndrome, if you will. C.S. Lewis wrote about this. He has an essay called The Inner Ring, where he talks about the fact that there's always this inner ring that you're going to be chasing. So it's the idea that, like, you're outside the club and you see the VIP entrance. That's the inner ring. You get there, then you're inside the club, and now there's the velvet roped off area, and you're like, oh my God, I need to be there. So then you get there, and then you realize there's a back room, and you keep peeling this onion, and eventually there's nothing left.
You're describing my 20s.
Yeah, well, it's everyone, right? It's this natural feeling that you're trying to chase that inner ring. And when you do that by trying to buy things, you are on a road to misery, and you're never going to end up anywhere worth going. The path and the switch and how you fix that is you try to acquire status through earned means. You have to go earn these things. That is how you actually build lasting status, the real status that you want. It's by building something, whether that is building a company, creating jobs, creating something of value, whether it is by building a relationship that's really meaningful and deep, whether it's by building a body. That's why I say a six-pack is more of a flex than a Rolex. That is how you actually earn. It's earned status rather than bought status. You don't have to look very far to recognize the difference. Think about someone winning a lottery, right? Someone wins $1 billion in the lottery. They're not just suddenly respected by the CEOs and the biggest companies in America because they didn't earn it. They got lucky and they won the thing. Great for them. But they're not suddenly like some respected individual. They just won a bunch of money. Versus you go build a $10 billion company, you make $1 billion doing it, you're going to have earned a whole lot of respect from a lot of people because it was really hard. You actually had to go through something challenging to earn that status that you now have. So that differentiation between bought status and the trap of bought status versus earned status is a really important one for people to understand.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I thought of what initially came to mind was the Hawk Tuah girl. How just like overnight she became the most talked about person on social media, but it wasn't like earned. It was like she said something silly on a like a man on the street interview, and obviously became the most talked about persona like overnight. And now I feel like, well, I mean, she ran that pump and dump.
What happened to her actually? Is she still doing her podcast? Is she still? I haven't seen much.
I mean, it's not like I actively track her whereabouts, but
not that actively.
No, but I know that she launched a podcast and then she did this shitcoin pump and dump scheme on social media. And I believe she's been
those never work out.
Yeah, those never work out. Yeah, but it wasn't earned fame, you
Yeah.
know, or like notoriety. It wasn't earned for any like meaningful, productive means. It was just like some crazy thing that she said.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you see that exact archetype over and over and over again, right? Like the ones that last are the people that it was the overnight sensation 10 years in the making.
That are
Those
like building real value.
Yeah, they've built something over long, long periods of time, and now suddenly you know about them. But under the surface, like Mr. Beast, right? Like the reason you know his story, and it's so well articulated now, is like for 10 years he was making videos that no one was really watching, and now he's obviously an enormous sensation. But like he was learning and getting better at a craft over and over and over again, obsessing over a craft for 10 years prior to becoming the thing that everybody knows about. And so again, it goes back to that exact point of like, it's built through long, long periods of struggle and pain. It's the idea that every single thing you want in life is on the other side of something that sucks. It could be 100 hours of focused work to build the business that you want. It could be 100 hard workouts and bland meals to build the body you want. It could be 100 hard conversations to build the relationship you want. But every single thing is on the other side of something you don't want to do. The answers you seek are found in the actions you avoid. It's not sitting around. It's not thinking about it. It's not planning it. It's actually doing the thing.
It's so true. The myth of the overnight success. Yeah. It's by the time, you know, I've used this metaphor with like musicians, but it's like by the time you've heard somebody who's really at the top of their game, I mean, they've put in at the very least their 10,000 hours to get to the point where they are. Like there's no such thing as an overnight success. When you see somebody who's like putting real value into the world and they're good at what it is that they're doing. But I feel like we don't always appreciate that. And we lust for, you know, we envy sometimes, you know, people who seem to have achieved like an overnight level of notoriety. But that's so seldom how real success happens. You know, there's that graph that you sometimes see on social media, how people often believe success is going to unfold, and it's that linear line, when in reality success is like way less linear than it might appear.
Yeah, it's also this funny thing of we call people lucky when they make it, and luck has this funny characteristic of being an outsider's view on something. It's what we say when someone achieves a success that we cannot explain from the outside looking in. So I see you now suddenly have this level of fame, you've achieved all these things. I'm like, oh, Max got so lucky. And what I always say is, you are 1 year of focus away from people calling you lucky. Like every single day showing up and working on a craft, hammering on your craft every single day over and over and over again. A year from now, people are going to call you lucky. And you're going to know that luck had nothing to do with it. But the outside looking in, that's going to be the perspective, and you can wear that as a badge of honor.
Amen. It's like when you look at fit people and in the back of your head, you know, you scoff cynically and you're like, oh, they probably have good genes. But it's like if you adopt and consistently with discipline adhere to healthy habits, the basics like, you know, regular resistance training, eating a diet that's largely minimally processed whole foods, you prioritize protein. I mean, sooner or later, you are going to be the person in your friend group that everybody thinks has good genes.
Yeah. It's a form of cope, right? Like on the internet, steroids or like genetics are like the two things when like you are sort of envious of the person's body and you're like, oh, steroids. As though like you inject a steroid and suddenly you're just like poof, incredibly aesthetic and just jacked and lean. Like that's not how steroids work for anyone out there.
Yeah.
There's still an extraordinary amount of work. Is it natural? No, but like there's an extraordinary amount of work one way or another, and it didn't do the work for you. The steroids didn't lift the weights for you. And it's the same thing with genetics, right? Like, yes, there are people that are going to have better genetics than you, always. There's always going to be a bigger boat, right, in whatever area of life that you are going after. But spending your time concerning yourself with how others got there rather than spending that same energy on improving yourself just seems like a bad path to go down.
Totally. Is there a small daily habit that creates long-term wealth in all areas?
I think in each area, we need to think about what is the tiny daily investment that you can make to compound. So the probably most important concept in the entire book is that all of these areas of life, we need to treat the exact same way that we treat financial wealth. With financial wealth, we know that a tiny daily investment is going to stack and compound over the long term. That investing $100 in the S&P 500 today is probably a good move because it's going to grow and be worth a lot more than that in the future. Same exact rule applies to these other areas of your life. Daily investments in your relationships, arguably the best investments that you can make. But we don't think about relationships that way. We don't think about these other areas of life in that same way. So what we do, especially as ambitious people, is we allow optimal to get in the way of beneficial. Meaning we say, I don't have an hour to spend with the person today, so I'm just not going to text or call. Or I don't have an hour to work out, so I'm going to do nothing. Or I don't have, 30 minutes to read, so I'm going to not read at all. All of those things are allowing optimal to get in the way of beneficial. The important thing to remember is mathematically, anything above zero compounds. Anything above zero. Doing a 5-minute walk is better than doing nothing. Doing 10 minutes of reading is better than nothing. Texting the friend when you think about them is better than nothing. All of these things stack positively over long periods of time. So even if you don't have time, or if you're not in a season of your life where you can really focus in on this one area of wealth, you can still do some tiny daily thing for it that is going to build it in the right direction. To answer your question more specifically, if I were to point to like one thing in each area, when it comes to relationships, my number one rule is when you think something about someone, text it right then. That inspiration is perishable. Like the inspiration that you feel to tell someone something goes away very quickly. So if I have a thought, or if I see an article that I think someone would like, or if something sparks me to remember someone, if I see a photo memory on my iPhone, I send it to the person right away. Because those little touch points with people, again, it's the tiny daily investment. It takes 2 seconds that stack and compound the strength of those relationships over long periods of time. It's really powerful.
It's super powerful. Yeah, we so often let perfect be the enemy of the good.
So in all of these areas of life. I mean, it's particularly damning for people who do consider themselves to be high achievers, because they build up what it means to check the box to this really, really high level. And I know that because that's me. I know that feeling of like, oh, okay, I need to start journaling because I know journaling is really good for you. So that means 30 minutes, there's a candle, have a little glass of whiskey. Like I create this whole thing in my mind of what journaling means, when the reality is it could be 2 minutes sitting down and just jotting something down that's on my brain. Meditation, like I remember when I first tried to meditate, in my mind I was like, if I can't meditate for 30 minutes, I'm a complete loser. I have to get a brainwave sensing headband, and I like all of these things, right? You build it up to this level where we know from having done this for a long time, you cannot become consistent if the first iteration on the thing is this like level 100 version of the thing. You have to start at the tiniest level. The way that I always talk about how to be consistent is to say, you have to hold yourself to the fire in the act, but give yourself grace in the amount. Meaning, hold your feet to the fire to actually do the thing every single day, but give yourself grace in what the amount of that thing is. 2 minutes is better than nothing. 5 minutes is better than nothing. If you do that, and you remember that every single day is actually easier than most days, for whatever reason, paradoxically, it's easier to do something every single day than just most days. It becomes more a part of your identity. Those two things will fundamentally change your life.
Is there anything that's emerged from your research, maybe it's a habit, that's changed your own life?
My journaling has definitely changed my life. Journaling scientifically is a very positive pursuit for your mental health. It reduces feelings of stress and anxiety. It actually helps you sleep better if you do it at night before going to bed. I used to be really wound up at the end of the day, like a total stress and anxiety ball, and it would carry over into how I slept. And so my sleep was really bad because I would sit in bed, all these thoughts spinning on my mind. I would stare at the ceiling, not be able to fall asleep. As I said, used to think that journaling was like this long 30-minute thing. What I did was I created a method, if you will. I call it my 1-1-1 method, which is I write 1 win from the day. That's something that I felt good about. 1 point of stress or anxiety, something I want to get off my brain and onto the paper. And then 1 point of gratitude, something that I felt grateful for during the day. It takes like 2 to 3 minutes. I just write it on a blank sheet of paper in the evening, and immediately creates this feeling of calm before going to bed. It has dramatically improved my sleep, my mental well-being. All of these areas of my life have kind of flowed off of this 1-2 minute practice. Incredible ROI.
That's not a very heavy lift.
Anyone can do that tonight.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, we've definitely had a few guests on the show in the past who have talked about the evidence-based benefits of journaling, and yet nonetheless, I've been incredibly intimidated by it. Like I haven't even begun. It just seems like this arduous process, almost like on par with meditation. Like I know the science-based benefits of meditation. Do I do it? No.
Well, it's really meditation is really uncomfortable. I still don't meditate, for what it's worth. I have found extraordinary benefits in those same arenas from just doing this 2-minute journaling exercise. I honestly, even calling it journaling makes it feel more intimidating than it is. All you're doing is you're taking a blank sheet of paper and just getting like 3 things down onto it. And it has this enormously positive effect on your life. I really would encourage you to try it and just see what you think of it, because at most, it's a 2-minute waste of your life. And I highly, highly doubt you're going to feel that way.
I feel like there's like an app idea there somewhere.
I think some people, since I've talked about it, I wrote about it in the book, and I've seen some people saying they're like creating different versions of it to just allow you to do it. I personally think that writing it down on a physical piece of paper is part of what makes it such a positive thing for me. It's not a phone activity. It's not a computer activity. It's literally like a blank piece of paper. Because for me, the act of writing is therapeutic. Like when I have to articulate something that is causing me stress. Like I'm feeling stressed about releasing this book. It's so permanent. I'm feeling imposter syndrome, whatever that thing is. When I go and sit down and lie down in bed, I'm like, oh, I actually got the thing physically off my brain. I don't know if you ever watched Harry Potter, like the Harry Potter books or the movies. There was this like thing where Dumbledore would take his wand and put it to his head, and he would like pull a thought out and put it into the like cauldron. It like feels like that to me. I'm like, okay, just pull the stressful thought, put it down onto the paper, and now it's gone. Now I go get into bed and I feel good.
Damn, I like the 1-1-1 method.
Yeah.
And it's one
win from the day. So something you feel good about, 1 point of stress or tension, something that's causing you stress, and then 1 point of gratitude. Could be big or small, something from the day that you just felt grateful for.
Man, I feel inspired to try it.
Give it a shot.
Yeah, so cool. What would you say your why is? What's your why?
My wife and son are my world. If I'm being totally transparent, my up until about when I was 30, I thought that I didn't want kids because I thought that kids were a distraction from the much more important thing, which was making a bunch of money. That was that path that I was chasing, the one thing at the expense of everything else. And I had this very clear moment in my life. My son was born. He came out. I was holding him in the hospital. And I had this sensation of, I spent the first 30 years of my life wondering what the meaning and purpose of all of this was. And then it was staring right back at me. And from that moment on, I have felt like a fundamentally different person. Like I've just never looked at the world the same. Every single thing that I do, I have a clear focus of like the type of person who I actually want to show up as, the type of person that I want to be. I think it's made me a more compassionate and kinder person, probably a slightly more patient person, not all the time. And fundamentally, it's created a level of focus and clarity in the things that I do because I believe that you cannot teach your kids anything. You have to embody the things that you want them to learn. And now I view anything that I am doing in the world as being something that he is going to be a sponge to. And so how do I want him to grow up? What do I want him to be embracing? What are the actions? What are the behaviors that I want him to see? And that has changed the way that I operate on a daily basis.
Well, your child's obviously seeing you ascend, and achieve remarkable levels of, wealth with regards to notoriety, with regards to, finances. But how are you instilling in him an appreciation for the other 4 types of wealth?
I think that actually he's probably more exposed to the other types of wealth than any of them. We do not, neither my wife or I are like into fancy things really in any way. So like I wear a running watch. Like I'm not into the like trappings of financial wealth in any way. We really value creating experiences with people that we love. So like I will splurge on things like bringing people together that I care about for an experience. And so my son, if there's one thing that I truly consider to be generational wealth, it's the fact that he is surrounded by people that absolutely love him unconditionally. And he is a social wealth billionaire. In so many ways. I mean, his mom is the most incredible person in the world and loves him dearly. He has 2 sets of loving grandparents who are obsessed with him. He has cousin who he loves, all of these people around him. He also is very aware of our time wealth in a lot of ways. The fact that I now live a life that I have the freedom to take him in the pool at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday. And I can actually say no to things that I don't want to do so that I can make sure that I have the time to do that thing. And in the other areas of life, I really think that the most important thing is for him to understand the value of delayed gratification. I really consider that to be the one true life hack. To understand that the things you want are on the other side of those periods of struggle. What we were talking about earlier, that the thing you want is on the other side of the thing you don't want to do. And I want him to, again and again, over the course of his life, see that in the way that my wife and I live. I want him to see me working hard on things I care about. I want him to understand that we achieve the things that we want in life by enduring the things that we were afraid of. That uncertainty that we had to tolerate to get to the other side, that the ability to tolerate uncertainty is the way that you eventually win. The most dangerous person in the world is the person who can show up day after day, even when the rewards are uncertain. And for him to see that, I really very truly consider that to be the real generational wealth that we're after.
How do you teach him about failure, the value of failure?
By allowing him to fail. I have this one memory very clear from my own childhood of when I was 12 years old, I tried out. So I was a baseball player my whole life. I played in college. I got a scholarship, played at Stanford up in Northern California. And my whole childhood, I was like the best player on all my teams, right? In Little League, in this small town in Massachusetts, in New York, and then Massachusetts, like this, not crazy competition. I was good. And I tried out for this like elite all-star team when I was 12. And there were 16 players taken. And I was the 17th. I got cut. And they sent this letter and called to sort of let us know why I didn't make it. And I was devastated, 12-year-old, like bawling, crying, all this upset. My dad came into my room and he said, I know you're upset. I understand. Here are the things that they said you needed to work on. Let's go work on them this summer. And that summer we went out and worked on those things every single day. And I became so much better at the sport from that. I had an amazing summer with a bunch of friends because I played on the local team with a bunch of my friends that I was going to school with. And I personally think that lesson, the fact that he could have come in and said, they were idiots for not taking you. You were the best player there. That made no sense. They're wrong. You're right. Whatever. It was an injustice. He could have said that. And a lot of parents do say that. But that moment was a critical turning point. He didn't say that. What he said was, I understand you're upset. Here are the things you can work on. We're going to go work on those things. So you had the failure. I'm here for you. I'm supporting you. I love you. But I'm going to help lift you up to go and build around these things that you can now improve upon. That is how you turn a failure into an eventual success. It's through having people in your life that are there to support you, but also there to then go lift you up through that on the back end to help you do the work to go and achieve those things.
It reminds me of when I was growing up, I loved driving my dad's car. I was like really into driving. And
how old?
I was probably 15 or 16. Okay. I grew up in New York State, so I don't remember exactly what the age was where you could get your first learner's permit. But I remember I had a ton of experience under my belt. My dad was super generous and really thoughtful about letting me, learn how to drive on his car, which was it was like a Range Rover back then. And I remember I went and I took my first driver's test in Red Hook, Brooklyn, in New York. And I failed it, and I came home and I was destroyed. I was like, because I had in my head, because back then, like being a good driver, like
You
I was
might
like
as
really,
well have been Jeff Gordon out there.
Yeah.
Like,
but I was like, I was bawling, I was destroyed, and just super upset because I thought I was like a shoe in. I was like, it was something that I really loved to do, and my dad kind of handled me actually in the same way that it sounds like your dad, approached you. It was like, you just pick yourself up and try again, and that was really, I never thought about it that way, but probably a formative experience for me and how I kind of like see failure, which is something that, as an entrepreneur, you experience over and over and over again. Like I experience failure, like even today, most people would be surprised to hear that, but yeah, it's, you just have to pick yourself up, again and again and again, and use the experience of failure to iterate, to adapt.
Yeah. There are those early experiences that are so formative, and you kind of have one chance at it. Like that first time that happens to your kid, which path you walk down ends up being instructive for how your kid is going to perceive those things. I've always thought the two pillars of strong relationships are high expectations and high support. So high expectations are to say, I have very high expectations for you as a person. I believe that you are capable of extraordinary things, and I have those expectations for you. But also paired with the other pillar of high support, I am willing to lift you up on my shoulders to go and meet those expectations. I'm going to help you go out and do the work that they just said that you can improve upon. I'm going to actually be there for you. High expectations without high support manifests as resentment. We know relationships like that, where the person seems to have these expectations, but then they're nowhere to be found in terms of meeting those and reaching those. But the two in concert create this incredible force for growth and development.
High expectations, high support for people in your life that you
Anyone
love.
in your life. I mean, it could be your kids, it could be your partner. I think about that with my wife, like our relationship. We both have very high expectations for what the other person is going to be like, but we're also there for the person to actually support them through that. It applies to work and businesses, like for your colleagues, for people on your teams. You should be there and have both. I mean, as a leader in an organization, I think about that like from the people that work under me on my team, I have very high expectations for what I think they should deliver, but I am not too big to do any of the dirty stuff. I'm sitting there, like when we were launching the book, I was sitting there making boxes, handwriting notes, marking things in the books, packaging, like right alongside all of them. I'm willing to be there to support alongside that. And I think the combination of those two creates uniquely powerful bonds.
It's a beautiful thing. Well, who'd you write your book for? The 5 Types of Wealth.
Basically everybody. So far, the readers have spanned from an 11-year-old to a 100-year-old. I really fundamentally believe that this book is about questions, not answers. I would say that most books within the category of like general self-improvement are about giving you an answer for your life. They're like, here's how you have to live in order to achieve the things that you want. This book does not have the answers for you. It is very much about helping you ask the right questions so that you can uncover and then act on the right answers for your life. Because fundamentally, every single person is going to have different answers within their life based on where they are, the season of life, their own circumstances, situations. What matters is that the questions are universal. The questions are the same whether you're an 11-year-old or a 100-year-old or anywhere in between. And this book has something for you no matter where you are within that.
I love it. Well, thanks for coming in and sharing your wealth with us. Yeah, it means a lot. I know my listeners, my viewers super appreciate it. I've got one last question for you. But before we get to that, where can people find you on social media and where can they pick up the book?
You can pick up the book anywhere books are sold and find more information at the5typesofwealth.com. And then you can find me at Sahil Bloom on any major platform.
Love it, brother. Great getting to know you also. The last question that gets asked everybody on the show, what does living a genius life mean to you?
Ooh. Living a genius life means having the courage to ask the difficult questions about your life, the questions you've been avoiding, because the answers you seek in life are found in the questions that you avoid.
Beautifully put. Are there any questions you're avoiding, even today?
Right now. I would say the number one question that I consistently find myself avoiding is, how many moments do you truly have remaining with your loved ones? I think that's an easy question to brush under the rug and to just say like, oh, it's enough. It's good. And when you actually start doing the math on the amount of times you are going to have with these different people, the amount of experiences, the number of moments that my son is going to want me to tuck him into bed, the number of walks I have left with my parents, the number of hangouts I have with my old group of friends, it's actually far less than you care to admit or believe. And wrestling with that question sparks action to change that.
Oh, it does. Yeah. There was a graph, I think Tim Urban.
Yeah.
Was that the guy?
That's in the book too, actually. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Tim wrote a blog in 2015 called The Tail End, which is, I would argue, one of the single best essays or blogs ever published. And highly recommend people check it out. And I think it was the first articulation of this idea that you can actually measure the amount of time you have in moments or in experiences. And the start of my book is actually that idea articulated by a friend to me, which was, I didn't know it at the time, but that was the spark that changed my whole life.
Man,
Tim is a friend and he's fantastic. Highly recommend his writing.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm like somewhat familiar with his work. Wait, but why, right? That's like the
Wait, but why? Yeah, the stick figure drawings
Yes.
and all the stuff that he does.
Damn.
He's amazing.
Spend time with the people that you love, or at least care about. Important. Well, Sahil, thanks again for coming out. Yeah, your time means a lot. And thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that you think may benefit from it, and I will catch you on the next episode. Peace, everybody. Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.